All right, so Greg, Joe, Joach, was it Gao? Portuguese name, Raymond, Richard, Sammy, Tommy. Nice to meet you guys. I see you guys in the attendee list. Um, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join this session to pick my brain on anything, specifically ISO, please, not anything beyond ISO. Maybe if there's time, we can talk about different things. All right. Okay, cool. So just a little bit about me. So I'm a senior manager in compliance success at Sitel. Um, I previously worked as an auditor at Deloitte for 4 years. Also worked at BDO for a couple of years. And basically, in my career, I've been around 10 years. 10 IT security, the in the security compliance industry, as we can, if we can call it that. Specifically focusing on SOC 1, SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, and other frameworks that would involve any sort of security compliance. I also am well versed in managing risk management processes, doing risk workshops with clients. I mean, the risk assessment in itself is a requirement for a lot of compliance frameworks, as well as your internal audit. I actually studied internal audit at the University of Pretoria. So I'm from South Africa, if no one else knew where Pretoria is. Did my honors in internal audit, so I do come from an internal audit background quite early in my career, but very soon switched over into the IT field. Also did some work in data analytics, gap analysis for specific consulting projects, and also business process engineering. If we look at some legacy systems and trying to help clients re-engineer their processes or to automate some of their processes. So I've also been involved in some of that. All right, so let's look at the question around security compliance before we really get into ISO. So why do companies need security compliance? Um, the, if we look at the bottom line, boosting sales and growth in return boosts revenue. Everything is about money these days. So if your compliance into ISO 27001 is becoming a blocker for you to sign a new client or to retain clients or to build trust with your relevant stakeholders, then obviously you need to comply with a framework, whether it's regulation or a customer or any other stakeholder that would require this. But it's more than compliance. I mean, yes, we do say security compliance, but at the end of the day, you are reducing your security risks in your environment, providing assurance to your companies and to your relevant stakeholders that, look, the controls, the processes that we have in place are solid. You can sleep at night, you can invest in my company, or you can buy this product. Or I will retain you for another year because we are managing our risks by having the compliance in place with the necessary frameworks and so on. So in general, it reduces just your risks in over your environment. And then the third one I've touched on, in terms of complying with regulations, legal and security requirements. As some of you may know, there is quite a lot of regulation out there, especially when it comes to storing and processing data. I mentioned I work for PCI as well. When you talk about cardholder data, GDPR, CCPA, all those kinds of compliance with frameworks, but all of them would always have an angle in terms of IT security compliance, which we'll see more in the ISO 27001. All right, but this can be a huge pain, right? So I mean, compliance is not really a fancy word. It's not very something exciting. Um, Most stakeholders and board of directors, those are not really that educated these days. They see it more as a grudge purchase. I mean, think about it. You have a startup, you have all this investment coming in. You want to build the product, you want to scale, you want to boost sales, you want to get out there. And compliance is the last thing on the list. We actually should be the first thing because because what we've seen in the market is a mind shift from the compliance side to the actual continuously monitoring your environment. So now you're not just implementing processes and controls for compliance, but you're implementing them, like I said, to reduce risk, but also to continuously monitor your environment to make sure that you can provide assurance to the relevant stakeholders that you are serious about your IT security posture and that you have these controls in place. Sammy, I see a question. I'll get to it right now. Time consuming. So, I mean, it takes a lot of time. So if someone asks you or a customer comes to you and say, look, we need ISO 27001, just the thought process around that can take a while. Where do I start? What do I do? I mean, it becomes like a whole rat race around what we need to do. It's super complicated. A lot of these frameworks have a lot of controls that you need to comply with, a lot of requirements. What is mandatory? What is not mandatory? What do I need for my first year of the audit? What can I skip for the second year? Is that even an option? So there's a lot of complications around that. What tools do I need to implement? If I look at my SDLC process, which is normally a very complicated process for most companies, what do I need to implement over there to make sure I comply? So that it can get really, really complicated when one needs to comply with a framework. Tight deadlines, like I said, not only startups that are chasing these sales and growth and scalability, but also your bigger companies. If they are non-compliant in something, that could be a possible huge fine. So that can be a big deadline for them to chase a certain regulation or a compliance that they need to get in place. And then on the other side of the spectrum, your smaller companies, if they don't have a ISO or a SOC or whatever they need in place, that can be a blocker for them to get customers. So tight deadlines is something that can be a huge pain. Then, of course, costs. Like I said earlier, most people see compliance as a grudge purchase, don't want to spend too much money on compliance, when in fact it should be the first thing that you should look at because it builds your foundation, it builds your processes, it builds your controls. It becomes the essence of your company on which you build your company on for your controls to be in place, and your basis from which you provide assurance that you have a good product, you have a sound security posture in place, and you can deliver on any customer need without them worrying about their data or something that might happen to their data or to your product at the end of the day. All right, so let's maybe go to a poll quickly. All right, so have you ever done ISO 27001 before? All right, so you should see a poll appearing on your screen. If not, send me a chat because then I need to check something out. So if you guys can maybe take a minute or two, just please submit your votes. All right. I got 2 answers. I got 3. Great, keep them coming. Don't Google. I'm going to end voting in 10 seconds. All right. Got 3 votes. All right. Hi, Dennis. Welcome. Hi, Willie. Welcome, guys. All right, 3 more. Who hasn't voted? All right. Got 4 votes. 2 more. So who's the 2 culprits? Who hasn't voted yet? If you're struggling with the vote buttons, maybe just pop one in the chat. Let's give it 1 more minute. All right. Okay. So how long does it take to get ISO compliant? ISO 27001 compliant. I actually selected the wrong one, just by the way. We'll get to the other poll that was intended for this, but it's all the same. So if we talk about how long it takes to get compliant, so I got 2 votes for each. I got 2 votes for 6 months, and I got 2 votes for 1 year to get ISO compliant. So let me share the results. Great. All right. You guys can see that. Awesome. So let's talk about this for a second, right? So how much time does it take to get ISO 27001 compliant? So obviously, factors like how mature the organization is, how much knowledge you have about the ISO 27001 process. All of that is taken into consideration. Are you using any tools to assist you with this process? We'll get to the automation of an ISO 27001 in a second. But in general, this can be achieved in 1 month, actually. Even if some companies are quite big, which would mean that they're quite mature, so it should actually take a lot quicker. If you have the correct platform in place, you have the correct processes in place, you have the policies in place, you maybe have a company assisting you with this process. So there are tools and ways and means to literally get it done in 1 month. All right. Now, 2 of you said 6 months, 2 of you said 1 year. 1 year is on the extreme. If you take 1 year to do it, then people are not really serious in getting ISO compliant, or people are not really coming to the party, or just the project itself is just purely being poorly managed. If it will take you 1 year. 6 months is, I would also say, people dragging their feet, even if it's bigger companies. So, so 1 month, maybe 2 months max, you know, might be the range that you would look at to get your ISO compliance. All right, Sammy, you said your recommendation from where to start journey towards 27001. We are cloud native SaaS provider startup for healthcare sector. Everything runs in public clouds, not even own network or any own servers, trying to keep things simple. All right. So you're asking me for my recommendation from where to start journey towards 27,001. I would partner, honestly, I would partner with a consultancy firm or with a firm that can assist you in this process. I'm going to get to the benefits of using Sitel as a potential partner or as a consultancy firm that can assist you in this process to get you to that 1 month ISO certification. Now, since you mentioned, obviously, you are a native SaaS provider startup in the healthcare sector, and everything runs in a public cloud. I mean, this is really something we do a lot of. We have a lot of SaaS clients, so we specialize in a lot of industries, or I myself specialize quite in a lot of industries. But the last, I would say, maybe 2 years, there has been a lot of requests and a market demand for the ISO 27001, especially in the SaaS world. So yeah, I will show you later on that, you know, how Sitel can really benefit you in getting ISO 27000 compliant. And yeah, trying to keep things simple. ISO is simple. People overcomplicate it. I mean, really, it's you are given the framework. You are basically being told what to do. I think people struggle with the interpretation and obviously a lack of knowledge and that. But once you start working with someone that knows the way, then you'll see it's actually a very simple process, especially if you automate a lot of these things. All right, let's maybe check a couple more questions. So we've got some questions, some pre-registered questions. Let me stop sharing results. Okay, great. Now my slides went away. Okay, cool, that's it. Now, okay, so how long does it take How long does it take to do an ISO audit? Okay, we touched on that. Um, what is the difference between 2013 and 22? All right, we'll answer that in a second. All right, some of the questions I see, I'm just scanning through them to see if I should take them now. Okay, here's an interesting one. What are the difference between SOC 2 and ISO 27001? That's a good question. So let's look at market demand first. ISO 27001 is something generally is generally sought after more in the European market. SOC 2 is generally sought after more in the American market, in the US market. But in the last year or so, we are seeing a little bit of a shift between from the European market that are requesting more and more to get SOC 2 compliant. And why is that? The main difference, one of the main difference, I'm not going to go into too much detail with this question, is SOC 2 allows you the opportunity to test operating effectiveness. So what does that mean? In a SOC 2, I can provide assurance for a period. I can say my SOC 2 attestation, so that's another difference. SOC 2 is an attestation of a set of controls in your environment, where ISO is a certification. They already give you a set of controls. Where SOC 2 have principles, you map your own controls to it, right? So you already see the difference there. Now, when you take a SOC 2 and you look at operating effectiveness, you would say, okay, I have 60 controls, 70 controls mapped to my criteria, and I want the auditor to test them over a period of a year. So now you have a SOC 2 report to show your customers that for a year, I attested that they were working for a year, i.e. operating effectively. And the auditor, the CPA auditor would sign off on that. And you would have a report to say for 1 year, my environment was cool. It was great. It was operating effectively. It was good. Whereas in ISO, the audit is done in a point in time. So they would come in, look at your environment, you present your evidence, and you get your certificate. Okay, great. So, I mean, 1 month, I prepare everything, get the certificate, and move on, right? Whereas SOC 2, I need to be compliant for 1 year at least before I can actually do the SOC 2 audit. Now, I'm just using as an example of a 1 year. Minimum for SOC 2, you can do 3 months, but we'll have a Ask Me Anything on SOC 2 maybe next year. All right, so the main difference is you can show a period of assurance, whereas in ISO, it's a point in time. All right. Okay, let's continue. I'll get into some more questions. But yeah, please, if anyone else has questions, keep them coming through. All right, so what is ISO 27001 anyway? So let's maybe get into the more detail of ISO. So just an overview. So ISO is an information security standard. It's a set of controls. It's a set of policies that you need to implement into your organization. And this was created by the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, right? Don't ask me about the acronym. If you can ask a question about the acronym, why the S and O is switched, I'm not going to answer you. I'm going to give you the email of ISO. You can ask them. All right. Also, it provides businesses with a framework, like I said, framework of what? Framework of controls, framework of processes, framework of policies, guidelines, to establish, implement, and manage an information security management system, the ISMS. So if you are familiar with ISO, if you've heard about ISO, ISMS, the word ISMS would have popped up quite a lot. And if you're not familiar, what is the ISMS, you are wondering? So the ISMS basically is a set of controls, people, processes, policies that is used in order to manage your information security environment. That's it. You scope it. You also you would scope in the relevant systems. You would also scope out the irrelevant systems. So the ISMS in general is just a fancy word for your IT control environment and everything that would internally impact it or externally have an impact on it as well. It addresses people, processes, and technology. I've touched on that. And then another key thing is the three dimensions of information security is your CIA. The CIA from the States, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information security. All right. Let's go. ISO 27001. So, as you may have heard or not have heard, there has been updates. So up until 2021 December, I think, or January, I'm not sure, somewhere there at the end of 2021 or the beginning of 2022. They released a new update on the ISO 27001 standard. Previously, it was the 2013 version. It's a lot of years, 8 years since they brought out a new version, right? You would think it might be a little bit sooner. That might be a good question to ask guys. So, why didn't they bring out something sooner with a rapid change of technology environment? All the risks, you would have thought maybe, okay, bring out a new version sooner. But they thought the 2013 version was quite robust and they looked into the future and they foresaw these things developing, right? So that is maybe why they waited so long. All right. So what happened was in the 2022 version, they updated some controls, they added some new controls, and they removed some controls. If you want a detailed breakdown of that, you can reach out to me, reach out to Sitel. We can provide you with a more detailed breakdown. But in essence, the more robust controls enables organizations to address increasingly sophisticated security risks to ensure business continuity and gain a competitive advantage, especially around the whole cybersecurity risk that has been increasing over the years. The emphasis on data protection, data privacy has also increased over the years. So there has been a very high emphasis on that. All right. All right. Then previously there were 14 domains or 14 areas of controls, of control areas. And that now was now merged into only 4. So in the past, you would have had quite a lot of different control areas, but then what they did was they made it simpler and made it more to the point to have it all together in only 4 areas. These 4 areas are now called organizational, people, physical, and technological areas, where in the past, for example, in the technological areas, you would have had SDLC, you would have had not disaster recovery, you would have had, slips my mind now. But anyway, you would have had all different specific processes that would have been mapped to the technological area, where now they've all bunched it together and made it simple. Along with that exercise, there was also a reduction from controls from 114 to 93, which makes it also a little bit more easier to the point. What they found was some of the controls that they removed was addressing very minor risks in the ISMS or in the IT environment. So they decided to reduce it to 93 and really focus on the key ones, and also added some new controls, and especially around cybersecurity, like I mentioned. These controls are around threat intelligence, really looking at your threats in your environment, looking at the intrusions, looking at the vulnerabilities, being active, gathering as much information as you can and analyzing it. There's obviously a lot of tools that you can use in this regard. Cloud services, configuration management, information deletion, data masking. Now we're going into the privacy side of things, data leak prevention. In fact, a lot of breaches happens through people sending incorrect emails, clicking on links. So companies now have to put tools in place or show, in order to comply with ISO, put tools in place or show methods of data leakage prevention. Most of that can be prevented by obviously having tools in place that would cover that. And increase focus on monitoring activities. Monitoring your environment becomes a more, not only for security reasons, but also for data privacy reasons. uptime, performance of the product, especially if you look at the SaaS product, like Sammy mentioned, like what he does. Uptime is a very important metric. So it becomes important to have those monitoring activities. Web filtering, focusing on more granular control and testing around network filtering, how you manage traffic into and out your environment, and then also secure coding, which is just a little bit more granular approach towards how you secure your SDLC process. All right. Now let's take another poll. So we already did this poll because Wesley clicked on the wrong slide. So I'm going to jump to this poll and I'm going to ask you guys, have you ever done an ISO before? So this is the one we actually should have done. All right. So, all right. Let's get some votes in. Give it a minute. All right. Anyone else? Great. All right. Okay, so let's end voting, and yeah, so only two responses. No. So, that is why you joined this session, to ask me anything about ISO. So yeah, so I mean, people are not really depends on where in the world you are, right? So ISO in general is not only 27001. I mean, there's a lot of ISO standards out there. I think there's an ISO standard for making this nice table somewhere. Don't ask me what code it is. So there's a lot of ISO standards out there, and the 27001 is obviously the one about IT security. So yeah, it is something that depending on your market, especially in the SaaS industry, this is something that you would really come across, not only to comply or have a customer request, but also just to take your IT security posture just to the next level. Even though you might have the experience, the knowledge, and the skills, it's nice to have that framework to sort of like, for example, you may be in your own mind, in your 20 years experience of being an IT manager and manager or CISO, you'll be like, okay, 60 of the controls I am already doing, but I am doing which I think in my mind is the correct ones. But then you go for the ISO and you're like, oh wow, there are 10 controls here or 10 processes that I didn't think of, or maybe it's just 5, and those can be the key ones. So whether it's 10 or 5 or 20, whatever your precondition is for coming to the to getting an ISO, you can always just level up or increase your assurance by just going for an ISO 27001. All right. Okay, now. So I think when I answered Sammy's question, you asked for a recommendation. I should have actually just gone to this slide, and this would have been a great recommendation for you, for any other company out there. So Sitel is your ISO 27001 hub. All right. You leave your security compliance to us, to the platform, to the consultant that will assist you in this journey, and we will help you get compliant in a month's time. All right. And also helping you to stay compliant as well. As I mentioned, yes, compliance is maybe the first goal, but continuous compliant or continuous assurance, continuous monitoring, that continuous word, just to be on top of things, to be compliant the whole time, is what this platform is going to give you. So obviously, that platform itself is a SaaS tool or a SaaS system, and one of its core functions, if not the core function, is having it integrate with your tech stack. Once it integrates with your tech stack, it starts monitoring your environment. It also collects evidence automatically, showing you non-compliance issues, and also presents that information it collects to the auditor in an audit evidence format, which slices your time of taking manual screenshots, manual Excel sheets, or just being confused and taking a lot of time to go look for things that you don't know where to look for. Everything is um, everything is done in this platform. All right. It's also a smart. It's also a project management tool. So you would be able to assign tasks, assign deadlines, assign owners, manage statuses, tag people, have that collaboration of all stakeholders in the company in order to contribute to the ISMS, to your IT environment, in order to get compliant in a very streamlined and a quick and an effective manner. And of course, the people, the consultant that comes with it. So obviously, you can take the platform only, or if you don't have the knowledge, the skills, or don't feel confident, or do you want that 1 month ISO, get someone to assist you with it. We'll get it done as quick as possible. We'll walk you through from the beginning to the end. We take your hand from the beginning to the end. We'll get the auditor to do it for you. We are in the audit. We represent you as the audit. Um, and then, and beyond that, any other compliance objectives, the relevant consultant becomes your compliance officer, and takes care of all compliance needs, but also adds value in ensuring that your security environment is being monitored and that there is assurance being provided across the board and to all stakeholders that everything that you are doing at the moment is not only compliant with ISO, but also to best practice, and making sure you don't have any security issues down the line. All right. Now we touched on it a little bit. So how does it work? How does the Saito platform work? How do I get ISO 27001 with Saito? Excuse me 1 second. All right. So it will start with a kickoff, because obviously, even though with the experience we have, we need to understand your environment. We need to get all the stakeholders on board it, integrate your tech stack, understand your environment. Let's see the base that we are starting with in order to plan this project going forward and see, how we're going to get that ISO for you. So in the first week, we will customize the controls, because in ISO 27001, you don't have to comply with all the controls. You do need to comply with the ISMS section of ISO, but all the controls can be not applicable if the justifiable reason is accepted. For example, if you don't have a data center, you don't have physical offices, some of those controls can be scoped out. If you are not collecting data, then the data masking control can be scoped out. If you're not outsourcing any development, that can be scoped out. All right, so there's a whole lot of controls that you can scope out, scope in, and all of that understanding happens in that first week. Once we've done the scoping exercise, we will also do a gap analysis, understand, okay, now we have scoped in, scoped out what we need to. All right, what of these controls do you have in place? What are we missing from your ISMS? Have you done the risk assessment? Have you done a pen test? Have you are you doing code reviews on your SDLCs on your SDL in your SDLC process? How is your firewall configured? Do you have a firewall? So we would go through the whole list and see what the gaps are, and then obviously with our recommendations, we will assist you in making sure that those gaps get remediated. And that normally takes 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the number of gaps found. All right. Now, that means after we've remediated all the gaps, one of the advantages of ISO is we don't need like a SOC 2 to have an operating effectiveness period. All right. There is a SOC 2 type 1, but it's beyond the scope for this session. But once you have remediated all the gaps and you have all the evidence ready, remember using the Sato platform, so everything is super quick and you get everything super ready. Within 2 to 3 weeks, you can be ready for the audit. All right. So once you're ready for the audit, then we will then get the auditor, the audit will happen, and you'll get your certificate. And it's really as simple as that. Right. Now, is there any other way to do the ISO without a CITO? Possibly. I wouldn't recommend it. That would be a lot of work, a lot of grind, a lot of admin. You're probably going to have to hire. All right, I am back. Can I just get a thumbs up? And if anyone can hear me. Great. Apologies for that. Uh, so, um, so just to continue on from the previous slide, got dropped off just as I went to this slide that I'm showing now at the moment. So my question was, is there a way to do ISO without CITO? Possibly, but the time and the effort that's going to take is quite monumental. First of all, you need to get the framework. Without the framework, you don't know what controls you need to have in place for what you need to do. The costs that's involved in that. You need to get the auditor. You need to manage that whole audit process. And then also just the manual work that requires one to collect the evidence and put it in a presentable manner for the auditor for them to give you your certification is another challenge. Whereas using Cytel, we do all that heavy lifting for you and make this a very seamless and effortless process. All right. So any questions? You can use your QR scanner to scan the QR code. It will take you to our website. Go ahead and book a demo. Let the team show you what the platform is all about and how quickly you can get ISO compliant. Who knows, maybe you're lucky enough and you'll get me that will help you with it. All right, I'll give a couple of minutes for some questions. In the meantime, let me see what other questions there are that I haven't addressed yet. All right, this is something. Okay, great. So let me bring up the Q&A. All right. So it says Melissa. Melissa's just the coordinator. She gathered all the questions from everybody who registered or everybody that wanted to know something. So how do you determine samples to test during internal audit? So the sampling methodology is determined by the auditor that would do your internal audit. So again, what CITL brings to the party is internal audit itself. So if you would do an ISO without CITL, then you would have to get someone to do the internal audit for you. because you would need an internal audit report in order to comply with ISO 27001. In fact, it's actually part of the ISMS, which is your mandatory controls that you need to comply with. And without an internal audit, you wouldn't be able to even continue further with the ISO certification process. How do you determine samples to test during internal audit? Well, again, an ISO is not really it's not really a requirement to test a number of samples. So it's not like your SOC 2 with the operating effectiveness that you need to select a sample based on a population. Normally, what the auditors would do is, or what you would expect in an internal audit, a sample of 1 or 2, maybe 3, if we would need to get more comfort, would be selected, and that is only to verify that what you put in your policy, what you've explained you're doing, so that you can show an example that that it is implemented and in place. And the auditor will see that in the internal audit report and see, oh, for the SDLC controls, the sample was selected and the following, so a sample of a PR or a sample change was selected and the following controls were verified and so on. So it all depends on the methodology that would be followed for by the internal audit, but in general, it would be just 1 or 2 samples. All right, let's go for this one. How long does it take to get an ISO 27000 report? So I did say 1 month. So if the audit would finish in week 3, the auditors normally get, give or take, 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, for them to issue the ISO report or to issue your ISO certification. In ISO 27001, you don't get like an attestation report like you would get in a SOC 2. You would get the certificate, but the report is something that would be distributed to you if there were any opportunities for improvement or any non-conformancies that you would need to fix. So after the audit is actually done, the report and the certification all gets finalized within a week, maximum 2 weeks. All right. Okay, we spoke about that. The differences between 2013 and 2022. Then, all right, let's go for this one. What would be the most efficient way to improve the existing 27001? I think that's a typo, with new dated from 2022. Okay, I think it would be great if the person who posted this question would have been on the call, give some more clarity. So, but I'm going to assume that maybe they currently have a certification for the 2013 version. Now they need to go for the 2022 version. And what would be the most efficient way to improve on that existing 2013 version? Give Sitel a call. That's the most efficient way. We'll help you with that. So obviously there's a lot of, so basically a lot of controls would be removed. So again, you would need to understand the scope of the framework. You would need to have both frameworks, map it, if you're doing it manually, map it, remove the old ones. You'll see some of them merged, add the new ones, and get the evidence for the new ones. I think it was 9, if I remember correctly. It's not a lot, but you would obviously need to show evidence for that. The auditor will also go through your ISMS again to understand if there were any major changes. And maybe something not related to this question, but something very important in the 2022 version is the emphasis on risk management. So what the auditors want to see is anything that, for example, controls that we are marking not applicable, or a control that we don't fully have implemented, that they are raised as a risk. If you look at the configuration management control, it talks about configuring hardware, software, and so on. Whereas if you look at the configuration for hardware, let's talk about endpoints. You have 10 endpoints in your environment and you don't have an endpoint management tool. Now that can be a risk to manage 10 endpoints, or maybe not for you, but that can be seen as a potential risk. So you would have that risk in your risk register and addressing that issue. for example. So there's a real emphasis on having a risk-based approach in the 2022 version. All right. I think I covered this one a little bit, but let's briefly go over it. So what are the benefits of using an automated platform versus doing ISO manually? Time, cost. Some of you answered ISO can take 1 year. If you do it manually, it possibly can take 1 year. Drafting policies from scratch. I mean, that's a mammoth task. And making sure the policy includes everything needed for the ISO. So, I mean, I wouldn't really say there's any benefits for going manually. Yeah, you'll save some costs for not paying for a platform or for a consultant, but the time it's going to take and maybe the cost that you would spend on incorrect tools, because you speak with a friend and the friend said, oh, you must implement an HR system. But I like only have 5 employees. No, it's an ISO requirement. You need an HR system. So what? You got to pay thousands of dollars for an HR system. And the auditor's not like, no, you don't need an HR system. You just need to manage in a proper manner. You can use an Excel sheet, have version control, manage the access to that sheet. Someone takes responsibility of that. Then you can do it like that. But you wouldn't know that if you didn't have someone to assist you with it. All right. Let's see if there's any more questions. Let's maybe touch on this one. Do I need to comply with all ISO 27001 controls? There's a lot of controls. You only need to comply with the ISMS section of the ISO 27001 standard. In a nutshell, what does the ISMS section mean? You need to have information security policy in place. You need to define your scope. You need to define your external and internal issues. You need to define interested parties, define rules, responsibilities, have an internal audit, do a pen test, have a management review meeting, have your internal audit. And I'm thinking off the top of my head. But you can see there's a couple of things you need there to comply with the ISMS section. Without complying to that, you cannot even go to the rest of the controls. So that's the first thing they look at. And the auditor normally does this in a stage 1 and a stage 2 approach. Stage 1, do you comply with the ISMS controls? That's your first sections, some of the things I mentioned now. Stage 2 is all the rest of the controls that are not mandatory, but obviously you need to justify them to make them not applicable. All right. Okay, then what are the difference between SOC 2 and ISO? We already talked about that. Different versions. All right, I think that's pretty much all the questions. Is there anyone else on the call? We have 7 minutes left. Any other questions? All right, I see someone's typing. Great. Let's give them a second. All right, hi Sammy. Can you tell more what the integrations are doing? All right, so the site integrations to your tech stack, it's basically pulling the necessary evidence required to comply with the necessary controls from ISO. So we don't pull everything from your AWS or your GCP or your GitHub, whatever system would be relevant. We don't pull everything. In fact, you are in control of setting up the permissions, you are in control of setting up the role, and you have documentation to see what is being pulled. So all of that is presented to you upfront before you connect with any integration. So for example, if I'm just going to use AWS, for example, let's say you use AWS as your cloud service provider. Some of the integrations we would use there is integrate with your AWS IAM. Why would we need that? We would need to see a list of users and whether they have MFA enabled and whether they have the correct password policies, password policy parameters in place. What would that look like? It's literally a list of users, MFA enabled, yes or no. That's literally what we pull. Password policy, it would be the list of user, maybe an ID or something, and then having password length, password complexity. Are you compliant, yes or no? So it's that type of data. Nothing sensitive is being pulled. everything that's pulled is used for audit evidence, and also made in a presentable manner to the auditor as well. That's being pulled. But you're on full control of the integration. Let's say you integrate and you don't like what you see. That never happens. We've never had one client that would disconnect integrations because they don't like what they see. You are in full control of the integration. You just disconnect. Yeah, that's pretty much what they do. They automate the process. So instead of you taking screenshots from your IAM or screenshots from your guard duty, screenshots from your RDS, whatever services you have, all of that is collected automatically, and the auditors just go in, check, move on. Another thing that the integrations help with is showing to the auditor that you are monitoring your environment. I think I mentioned in one of the slides that monitoring activities is one of the controls in the ISO. So now you're proving that also you're actively monitoring your ISMS through the use of a Sitel tool that you can show if there is a non-compliant issue that you would need to fix. All right, hope that answered your question. Great, guys. Anyone else? Got 4 minutes. Great, someone's typing. I like it. More questions. Great. All right, pleasure, Sammy. If you want to know anything more, feel free to reach out on our website. Okay. I'll give it 1 more minute, and then I'm going to close it off. All right, then thank you so much, guys, for joining. And please check out or keep on monitoring our LinkedIn page for any future Ask Me Anything topics. I'm sure we will have a lot more coming on. And yeah, thank you for everybody for joining. Good luck with your compliance objectives. And like I said, please reach out if there are any other questions or you would like to have a demo booked. But till then, be safe, have a great day, and goodbye.